Kampala versus Nairobi. Which city is actually the better place to start your first business on the African continent? I just came back to Nairobi after spending a month in Kampala, Uganda. I met a lot of business people there. I tried to get as much insights as possible. I want to share with you what I've learned and how my perspective on certain things about business here in East Africa has changed. My name is Marvin, and over 2 years ago I moved from Germany to Nairobi here in Kenya, and ever since I've been exploring life, business and everything that shapes the future of the African continent. I just came back from spending a full month in Kampala, Uganda, and there are certain things I understand now after talking to many people on the ground that do business in Kampala or Uganda and still do business in Kenya, Nairobi as well. During this month I spent time with people who are restaurant owners, who have manufacturing plants there for furniture. I met up with people who have different tech businesses to really get a picture and good overview of what's happening in Kampala or Uganda and how the business environment looks. And if I can give you right away, the first lesson is that people said it's much easier to get started over there in Kampala than in Nairobi. And the reason why they were telling me this is that Kampala is basically more like a smaller town compared to Nairobi, where you have less competition, where you have less options to go out, for example, in terms of restaurants, where you have less options compared to Nairobi in many different sectors. Therefore, you are in a less competitive environment than here in Kenya. Kenya is already further developed than Uganda in many different things. Therefore, they told me it's easier to get started because Kampala is just growing right now, and that you can get into doing business there much easier. You can grow your business quicker because the city is just growing now. Therefore, they told me it's easier to get started there. It's easier to make your money back there than compared in Nairobi, because here is such a big city already. It's so far developed already that it might be a bit tougher and more difficult, and you need a bit more influence and steps on the ground to meet the right people, to build the right business, and you need to do something that's much more unique. It's of course more cost intensive than something in Kampala, for example. I talk, for instance, with family of mine who have a manufacturing plant for furniture there, for wooden furniture specifically. And they started this business a couple of years ago, and now they're already exporting into the whole East African market. They're exporting abroad outside of the African continent as well. And this also showed me that there's not much competition on the ground there. They could grow the business quite quickly. I talked to another friend of mine who has a restaurant there for 10 years just by simply having a nice, not the most luxurious, but like a nice environment for this restaurant. They have like a unique offering they have. I met people that opened their first bar 4 years ago, and now they have 5 of them already, and they're opening up another one right now. So I just see that the growth there is happening very quickly, and this especially for physical businesses. I think tech businesses might be a bit more difficult. Environment there is mainly focused right now on building out physical things, and this is an area where you can truly stand out at the moment, because there's not many options for kids playgrounds. There's not that many options for restaurants, let's say, compared to Nairobi here, where you have every single cuisine of the world already, and this in many different locations. And there, if you simply do something that's not there yet, you can definitely and truly stand out. Even if they have beautiful places there as well, I try to also roam around there, spend my time in as many different places as possible, and they also have beautiful locations. But I think these ones are doing very well because there's just less competition there on the ground. And I think it's just easier because, let's say, Nairobi is already like known as a tech hub, so it's just much further developed. More investments from foreigners are coming in. The local people are also very innovative. They're hustling hard, they building brands, they're building products. So I see the environment here is just a couple of years further ahead, let's say, than in Kampala, for instance. And one thing I understand now while looking at these two different cities, Nairobi and Kampala, is that it doesn't need to be the most developed city or like the most prospering economy already where you can invest and make your money and make your returns. It can be also just a smaller place where things are just slowly starting to come up. This is also one of my friends here from Kenya taught me, and they have a factory here as well, that sometimes smaller cities here in Kenya are growing much faster, and therefore you can get much more traction in these smaller cities, get more revenue out of these smaller places because they're just growing so quick, and you can be one of the first few players in this area, in this city, who's supplying certain kind of products. Another thing I realized while being in Kampala for a month, when I now compare with Nairobi, is that the environment is just a little bit slower over in Kampala. And this is nothing necessarily bad, it's just that the people are a bit more laid back. The servers there, for instance, in restaurants and cafes are just a bit more laid back and a bit slower. What I also can see as a good thing, let's say when you just want to wind down and like things are less stressed, there's less of a hustle, just a different pace of life than here in Nairobi, for instance. Even if things here are also slower compared for me to the western countries I lived in, but it's still much quicker over here in Nairobi. And in Kampala, I feel like if you meet one person, let's say I had the luck that I had my family already there, so they were connected with many different people there. Therefore, they introduced me to different people that do the various different businesses, and from there on we connected and they connected me with more people. It feels like it's a more community-driven vibe over there. What's also similar in Nairobi, but I think because Kampala is just a smaller place, you get to know many more people much faster than here in Nairobi, for example. In this instance, Nairobi is a bit maybe better for scaling something, because here of course it's a bigger place. Kenya is a bigger and further developed country than Uganda in different areas, and therefore I think it's a good place where you can actually scale up your business a bit better, but it can feel a little bit impersonal when you're just starting out. For instance, when I came here first, I tried to also connect with many different people. I met many different people in the first couple of months I was here. I went to many events, I went to networking events all over the city the whole time just to get a good picture of the city, but still sometimes it felt like these connections I made are a little bit more anonymous. And when I was just for 1 month now in Kampala, and maybe it's also a different scenario because there I have my family already, and that they introduced me to many different people, that they were quicker to say, okay, let's connect, and that they were quicker to say, let's do something together, and that there from there I could see a base that people from Kampala that did business in Juba, South Sudan, that did business in here in Kenya as well, that they had also other people on the ground here in Kenya, Mombasa, Nairobi, in different kinds of cities. They were much quicker to connect me with them. They were much quicker to connect me with people here in Mombasa, in different parts of other East African countries here as well, at least from the experience. But as I said, once again, it might be biased because it was a more personal introduction I got to these kind of people than I had here in Nairobi, because here I've just built my network out from scratch and I didn't know anyone in the beginning, but still it felt like there it went much quicker with getting the right introductions. Even when I was just researching over there and was not ready to invest in anything in Kampala, I still felt like I got the network quite quickly there from people doing things in Kampala, but also doing things in different parts of other East African countries here. Another thing I realized during that time is that the culture and networking in Kampala also works a little bit different than here in Nairobi. It has similarities, but it still has big differences. For instance, when I went out the first couple of times to meet some people that I knew already before I went to Kampala, that I met here in Nairobi, for instance, they took me to different kinds of places, and they told me that here in Kampala it's a necessary part if you want to meet the right people, that you want to get some introductions here and there, that you also need to go out into the nightlife, because there people are roaming around and you can make different kinds of intros than if you are not in the right spots. And I know that the same things happen here in Nairobi as well, that you can meet of course a lot of people when you go out to bars, to restaurants, to whatever places, but I feel like that there it's a necessary part, what I didn't feel as much when I was here in Nairobi, for instance. Here I met people at different kinds of scenarios, I met people at events, but in Kampala, for example, you have also much less events. I was trying to research many of them, try to go to some events, but just the offers they have there is just much smaller than compared to Nairobi, where you can go basically every single week to multiple different locations and occasions to meet some people here and there. Therefore, I think it's a different way of connecting with people there than compared to Nairobi. And one thing I also learned is that the nightlife is a really crucial part of the culture over there in Kampala. Whenever I asked some people, because I didn't want just to get to know the business environment, I also wanted to know the culture and to the people, what do people do, and wanted to see, let's say, more of the history and just what makes Kampala Kampala. Most people there were referring me to different kinds of nightlife events. And here, for example, in Nairobi, you have many more different things you can do besides the nightlife. And in Kampala, it feels like it's a big part of the culture to be part of the nightlife. And this from Monday to Monday. What is not the best place for me to roam around, because I don't enjoy nightlife too much, but I still went out once or twice on a casual basis to see what people are talking about and to see that people are actually always in bars, and this even on a Tuesday. The people are going out to a club on a Wednesday, so that people always are going out to these different places because it's such a huge part of the culture there as well. And as mentioned, it's similar in Nairobi as well. It's also a big nightlife culture, but I think it's just more intense over in Kampala. What was also very important for me, because I was also working from Kampala, was the infrastructure and tech, let's say the internet connection, the power grids, the power stability. And maybe I'm a bit biased because Nairobi has a super stable internet connection at all times. I have super quick internet here at my home, but I also have good connection, stable connection all over the place when I work in cafes, when I go to different places. Most of the time the connection here is very stable and very good and very quick. Recently there have been very much less power outages than when I came here first 2 years ago, besides maybe when there are very heavy rains. So I think the connection and everything here is very stable, and maybe that's why I was a bit biased when I went to Uganda, where I experienced, let's say, a little bit the opposite thing. So when I worked there from cafes, when I worked there from my home, and I even moved to different places in Kampala to see how different areas looks. I went to Kisasi, for instance, to Lukuli, to Buzinga, I went to Munyonu, I went to Bukasa, I went to many different places just to figure out and live there and stayed there for a couple of days in each of these locations to see how it is. So I checked out also different Airbnbs, and oftentimes I realized that the connection was not the best. It was not as stable as here in Kenya, for example. I also experienced more power outages over in Kampala than I do here in Nairobi. What's also, let's say, for my part of business, what I do is everything is online, so it made it a bit tough sometimes to work from there, because the times to download, to upload something, to have my calls was always a bit interrupted and delayed and just much slower than compared here in Nairobi. That said, I still got my things done. I just had to reorganize how I do the things. When I knew that I had to do and work with big files and uploads and downloads, I did them already in advance. I just planned things ahead and was just always charged with my power bank, was charged with my laptop. My phone was always charged before I left the house, because I knew when I come home or when I'm outside there could be a power cut. And it's not that it happened like every single day, like the whole day. It just happened a few more times than I was used to here in Nairobi. And this, for instance, matters more if you really are into tech, if you're working online, if you do any kind of online business, or like that business that relies heavily on internet connection. But if you are more into physical business, maybe manufacturing, like the people I talk to and the business owners, they always had like a backup generator over there. So there are ways around it, there are ways you can solve these things, and I think just is something that's, or maybe to keep in mind if in case you are going to each of these cities to work or to build something, just to have in mind that you will have and you will face different kinds of challenges in terms of the infrastructure for power and internet connection. So if I were starting from scratch, and this with a physical business, let's say a bar, a restaurant, a factory, a physical product or anything, I think Kampala might be a good starting point for these kinds of physical businesses. But now my businesses are most of the time heavily internet and tech based. Therefore, I think Nairobi is a better place as a launchpad for me in terms of this. I got even asked a couple of times from my family if I don't want to stay there with them and assist them with things or build my stuff over there, because most of the businesses are heavily physically based, and because I don't see myself going into this direction at this point of time. For me, Nairobi is just a better environment because it's a bit more international. So living wise, it's a better environment for me personally, and therefore if I would start over again, I prefer Nairobi over Kampala. But as I mentioned, if you are looking more into physical businesses, Kampala might be also a good consideration for you, because as I said, you have less competition, you have a growing city where you can reach people easier because the competition is lower, you have less layers of getting to know the right people. I think a quicker connection in terms of physical things you can do over there, and it might be also less cash intensive or capital intensive, because you might need to invest less to be more unique, to stand out in terms of physical businesses over there, than compared to Nairobi, where you have to do something really unique and do much bigger investments, for example. What I can say now in this instance, Kampala still gave me a lot of clarity to stay there for 1 month, this time with business focus only and work focus only. I can say that smaller cities, or let's say a little bit less developed countries, don't always mean that there's less opportunities. I think it even means the opposite. It means that there are more opportunities, that you can build and grow with the city together, that you can be one of the first ones in your niche instead of competing with many different businesses like here in Nairobi, for example. Kampala might be a good consideration for me when starting a physical business here on the ground in the African continent. All these things mentioned are just my personal observations, and I'm also looking forward to hear your experiences and your thoughts on this topic, and maybe I can also learn much more things, because I think a month in Kampala might be also not enough to give 100% clarity on everything. It's just something I wanted to get out to give you some kind of perspective as well when you're thinking of doing different kinds of businesses here on the African continent. But now let me down below in the comments which country or city you would choose in terms of starting your first business here on the African continent, or if you're from here, which country you are doing business in and what you have seen and observed over the time doing business here on the ground. I appreciate you watching, and thanks a lot. See you in the next one.